So after cutting the tabletop to its final length, I can go ahead and use my router and cut a rabbet on each side of the end of the tabletop, essentially creating a tongue that the breadboard end can fit into. And I'll use the table saw to cut the groove that will accept that tongue. And I'm just going to make a couple of passes, flipping the board end for end, making sure that that groove is centered. And then I'll just clean up the tongue real quick a little bit before trying to fit with my shoulder plane. I cut this tongue slightly oversized just to be safe. And then we can do the test fit, and it goes on nice and snug. Next, we're going to use the domino to create the mortises that we need for these breadboard ends. And I'm mortising directly into the center of that tongue, and I'm using a piece of tape with 3 marks on it. And I'm using those marks as my reference to create these mortises so that they'll all end up being the same size. And so I can just move the tape to where I want the next mortise to be and use the same marks again. So next I'll cut the mortises on the breadboard end. And this is done exactly the same way. I'm using the same piece of tape, except instead of using the 2 outside reference marks, I'm just going to use the edge of the piece of tape. This is going to give me a wider mortise on the breadboard end, which will allow the table and the tenons to move around in there, and it'll allow it to expand and contract. So off camera, I made these floating tenons that will fit into the mortises that I cut. And if you haven't seen it, I did a video on making your own dominoes, and this was very, very similar, so I'll put a link to that here. So the next step is just to glue all of these tenons into the mortises on the tabletop. The next step is to drill holes in the breadboard end all the way through where the mortises are. So eventually that hole will go through those tenons. And it's pretty easy to, just reference off the marks that you had on the table for the domino. Next, we'll go ahead and put the breadboard end on the table and transfer those hole marks onto the tenons. And you do this by using the same drill bit and just putting it in the hole and tapping down to make a little pin mark on the tenon. And it's preferable to use a brad point bit here so that making this mark is pretty easy. I'm going to draw bore these mortise and tenons, so when I drill the hole through the tenon, I want it to be about 1/16 of an inch closer to the tabletop than that little pin mark that we just made. This is going to pull the breadboard end in really tight once we insert the dowels. The next step is to take a round file and elongate these holes. This is going to allow the tabletop to expand and contract around the dowels that we're going to use to attach the breadboard end. Next, we'll go ahead and install the breadboard end and start pounding in our dowels. They're a little bit tight because of the draw bore, the offset, but they should go in just fine. And I like to put a little bit of glue at the very end just to secure it to the breadboard end. The last step is to take a flush trim saw and cut off the excess portions of the dowel. And that's about it. Essentially, this breadboard end is complete. So do me a favor, if you liked the video, go ahead and like, subscribe, share it with your friends. And if you have any comments, leave them below. Alright, go build something.